welcome to this session on philanthropy in the Chinese community. I think as most of you are aware, this is one of a number of sessions at this fabulous conference looking at philanthropy or diversity in philanthropy, picking up the fact that we in Canada have become an extraordinarily diverse community and that philanthropy is important to all of us. We have a two-person panel, what I understand from a very brief conversation with the two gentlemen sitting in front, is that Ted Garrard is going to interview Justin Poi, so that should be all very interesting. I've also passed around pink evaluation sheets, if you could fill those in. I guess give them back to me. I don't think we have a student in this room. We have many students in the room, students of philanthropy, but I mean a student intern in the room. So I'm happy to collect the evaluation forms when the session is over and pass them in. Before I introduce the two gentlemen sitting in front of you, I'd like to, on your behalf, acknowledge the support of the Offered Group and Optimal Payments. As you've heard now in many sessions, sponsors are critical in any conference, and we are very grateful for the support of the sponsors of this particular session, and we'll come back to that later. Let me now quickly introduce the two gentlemen so we can get on with what will be a very interesting session. To my right, your left, is Ted Garrard, who's the president and CEO of the Sick Kids Foundation of Canada. It supports one of the world's leading centers for pediatric care research and learning. What he said to me is that the Hospital for Sick Children began in the 19th century, and that really just startled me terribly. I come from a city where there was a fight over a children's hospital that started maybe 40 years ago. The foundation raises more than $120 annually and
$120 million.
You're right. I can't read. You're quite right. I was looking
I wouldn't have a job if it was $120.
You're absolutely right, Ted. But what really was getting me was the fact that my eye hit on endowments valued in excess of $900 million. Yeah. That's pretty significant, and is the largest non-government funder of children's health in Canada. Prior to joining the Sick Kids Foundation, Ted served as Vice President and External at the University of Western Ontario. He was there for 13 years, from 1996 to 2009, where he led campaigns that raised more than $600 million. He also spent 13 years at United Way of Canada in a variety of roles, including leading all fundraising operations. He is chair of the Canadian Children's Hospital Foundation Executives, a director of the Children's Miracle Network, past chair of Imagine Canada, past chair of United Way of London Middlesex, past director of United Way Centraide Canada, et cetera, et cetera. Well, he was also named one of Canada's top 40 under 40 in 1998 and was in 2014 named Outstanding Communicator by the International Association of Business Communicators. Clearly an impressive resume. Sitting directly in front of me, again to your left, to your right rather, is Justin Poi, President and Creative Director, the Justin Poi Agency. It's an award-winning full-service advertising agency based in Toronto, specializing in English and ethnocultural marketing and advertising. He is a public speaker on topics of diversity and inclusion, and in 2013 launched a national speaking tour across Canada and the US, teaching marketers how to tap into diverse markets using very large social media networks from abroad, such as Weibo, QQ, and RenRen. His latest keynote was at the Digital Dealer Conference in Atlantic City for the US automotive industry. Justin has served on many boards, including the board of directors of the Trillium Gift of Life Network, the Kidney Foundation of Canada, the Ontario Media Development Corporation. He currently sits on the board of Sick Kids Foundation and serves as vice chair of the Canadian Foundation for Chinese Heritage Preservation. He established the Chinese-Canadian Community Box Theatre 1 at Tiffbill Lightbox, bringing together leaders in the Chinese community. He too has received a wide range of awards for his outstanding philanthropy, concern about the Chinese and general Canadian communities, and what a treat to have the two of them in front of us. So over to you, gentlemen.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you. Oh, yeah, we got the microphones, yeah.
Justin is also an amazing singer. If you've ever seen him in action, he's fantastic. And he also just happens to be one of my bosses because he is on the Sick Kids Foundation board. And here I am, I get to interview him today, and he does all the heavy lifting and the hard work, which is, I think I like that relationship very much. My own involvement in diverse community fundraising really started in the 1980s with the United Way. Many people may remember the good old Chinese community walkathon that used to launch the United Way campaign every year, organized in large part by Dr. Joseph Wong, who is a legend in the Canadian Chinese community. And in those early days of trying to engage with diverse communities, I would say we were just swimming in the dark. We really didn't have an understanding of what we were doing, why we were doing it, what the outcome would be. We just knew we had to do it. And fast forward to 30 years, I think we understand a lot more about it, but I still don't think we've made the kind of progress that we need to make. And in part, we're going to talk about that today with Justin. And I wanted to kick off the question broadly before we get into talking more specifically about the Chinese community. You've worked with a number of charities. You've seen the philanthropic sector for a very, very long time. Do you think we've made good progress in the issue of diversity and inclusivity? And if so, what's working and what isn't working so well?
Well, okay, that's a huge question.
I know.
Yes, and the what is working and what isn't working is a massive list, so we'll get into the details later. But are charities doing a better job? Well, they are almost just by the nature of immigration patterns and whatnot, and people are much more aware of immigration. The landscape of Canada in the 70s and 80s is completely different than now. I'll give a very good example. Private schools, they rely heavily on fundraising, and just by the nature of their student base, I mean, they can't really ignore it. There were some schools that had maybe 5% non-Canadians that were immigrants or overseas students, and now they could be as high as 50%, 40%. And so just by that nature of it, I think of one private girls' school that had so many students that were boarders that they decided, in order to fundraise, they actually had to organize trips to Hong Kong to actually meet the parents. So in those particular instances, it was almost by osmosis.
Sure.
But for charities that have had to specifically put campaigns together to go out and reach them, I would say that there are some that do a really good job.
Yeah.
There's some that do, I wouldn't say there's anybody that does a horrible job. I would say they're either completely absent, or they're doing a great job, or they're doing a very, very mediocre job. And the ones that are doing a mediocre job, I find those the most interesting because there's so much room to work with, and it's sometimes a combination of they're missing something, or it's a lack of commitment, or very often, especially smaller charities, they're so busy and so taxed that if somebody came up to you and said, hey, I got a brand new project for you, and slaps it on your desk, it looks great and everybody's on board, but who has the time to really do it?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
So what are the characteristics of a charity that's doing it well? Like what makes for a really effective inclusivity, diversity strategy for a charity that is really getting into the game and can be successful? What are the ingredients?
Well, the other than commitment, which is a given, and I'll talk about commitment later because there's many levels of and different areas of commitment. But I think one of the most important things is relevance. I mean, there's many charities and not-for-profits that have no idea how to create that relevance. You can, it's interesting. You were saying that back in the 80s, United Way was kind of shooting in the dark because there were no metrics, there's no measurement. You just knew you had to do it, and especially as we got into the 90s and you saw this influx of immigrants coming from Hong Kong, there was nothing to measure. People just knew they had to do it, right? And in a way, these days, it's sort of happening again. Like people are not. when you look at the population of mainland Chinese coming in, there's no data on them. People just know that they have to do it. And so there's a certain amount of blind faith in there. Certainly, charities that are accountable to the board and the boards that are accountable to money that's essentially held in the public trust, shooting at the hip is not really something that charities like to do. So that's where some of the stifling of advancement lies. Whereas if you look at companies that have gone after diverse, they can shoot from the hip all they want. I mean, so if they lose, it doesn't really matter. I mean, they'll just make it up somewhere else. So I think that that's probably one of the areas that I could see could be improved.
I think one of the things we've learned as well is that you cannot paint a diverse community as being homogeneous. They're not. And in fact, you just look at the Chinese community, for example, and you have the immigrants from Hong Kong who are now second and third generation.
Yep.
You've got mainland Chinese who are increasingly arriving, and many of them actually not with a lot of resources, others who are incredibly wealthy. You've got the Taiwanese Canadian population as well. And Justin, say a little bit more about how you've seen charities try to come to grips with the fact that many of these communities now are themselves diverse.
Well, again, okay, I'm going to tie that to commitment.
Sure.
If I say I'm committed to diversity, I mean, what does that mean? I mean, banks spend millions of dollars just for banking for women. I had no idea that women bank differently than men, but there are certain aspects of women who become entrepreneurs that the banks obviously have spent time and money to understand it. So right there, just in our basic human population, we've got a diversity of 2.
Yeah.
And then you add, so after gender, then you add race and all sorts of, and it just becomes so split up. So there's some charities that I think those early discussions are awful. Like I've been in those early discussions because you come in and you say, okay, we're going to be diverse, and we're going after it, and we're all about inclusion and diversity, and you come out of there with these papers stuck to the walls that drill down into every possible nook and cranny, and you realize how much that's actually going to cost, and you need a staff of 1,000 to actually manage it. And so I think that organizations that have been very good, for example, at going after the South Asian community or going after the Chinese community, I think when they realize, oh, there's different groups, some of them have done it well and some of them haven't. If you've created, for example, a cabinet or some sort of board or a committee that's done a very successful event for years, and it's been led by somebody like a Dr. Joseph Wong, who's a legend in the Hong Kong Chinese community. Nobody in the mainland Chinese community knows who he is. Not a single person, right? And in fact, he founded and runs a very successful old age home in the Chinese community called the Yihong Foundation. Mainland Chinese people, I mean, probably we'll see in the next 10 to 15 years, those immigrants will need retirement homes. They won't be going to Yihong. They serve Cantonese-style food. They all speak Cantonese. So they're actually, them and Manchung are actually struggling to try and create homes now where they're Mandarin speaking, they serve northern food, but it just gets drilled. Even the Chinese charities are having trouble splitting it down even further. And it's become a very confusing time for a lot of people, but I think that the charities that really get it. I mean, there are some charities right now who are just starting to reach the Chinese market now. They've said, you know what, forget the Hong Kong Chinese. They came here in the 90s. They're already assimilated. Yes, they still speak Cantonese. They still buy the Chinese newspaper. But for the most part, they're income-wise, the glory days are over. I mean, they've managed to become part of the Canadian fabric, and there's no more juice there. So what they do is they just go after the mainland market because those are the new immigrants. And the charities that have been the most successful are the ones that can actually go mentally through the journey of what it is to be an immigrant. I mean, let's just take our own country, for example. People did not leave Europe and come to Canada because they were just doing so well. If you're doing really well, you're not getting on a boat and coming to a brand new place that has no people. So there's always an origin and a reason. And I find that when people are trying to get into different markets, they don't understand where those people come from and what their motivations are. Like, why did they come here? What is the reason? So in the early 90s, there was a huge influx of immigration to Canada from Hong Kong. In fact, there was a surplus over 2 years in 95 and 96 of 350,000 immigrants. And Immigration Canada had to set up 2 offices just to handle all the immigration papers. People already knew these people are coming here because Hong Kong in June 1997 was being handed back to China, and people didn't know what that meant. So I don't know, I would have, if I was in Hong Kong at the time, I would have packed up and left too. But they are immigrants that had, for the most part, a lot of them had money. Hong Kong was and still is a very entrepreneurial place with very low income tax. So so marketers here and charities here knew that they had money. They also knew that it was a British colony and that the spirit of philanthropy was well ingrained in them. Now, let's take, for example, the same thing happened with the Russian community. When people from the former Soviet Union started coming here, well, only the ones with money were able to come. And so charities knew exactly, there's money there. But the key is, when they get here, do they care about your cause? Like, that's really the big thing, is do they care about your cause?
Yeah, so you talked a lot about relevance, right?
Yeah.
And how do you make your charity relevant to diverse communities? At Sick Kids, we see people from all walks of life coming into the hospital, and we think, oh, they get us, they know how philanthropy is supposed to help out the hospital. Actually, they have no idea. And so it's really creating that education and awareness of not only the work that your institution does, but how philanthropy makes a difference, because there is an education process that has to go on before you can really start asking people to give. They need to understand why there's an expectation that people give, and also what impact it has. Right?
Which comes to commitment.
Yeah.
So most charities, if a consultant or internally, one of the development people says, well, we really have to, start educating. I mean, if I was the money person in that office, I'd be like, how long does this take? And how much is it going to cost exactly? Because, you want to start seeing some results. And it is that education process that can be, the ones that are in for the long haul are the ones that are going to get it. And the education process is not just finding the relevance, but let's just take, for example, the mainland Chinese community, which is sort of really the big news when it comes to immigration these days, even though it's slowed down a lot because the federal immigration program, the business immigration program, was ceased. For various reasons. But think about this. Anybody who has any amount of money from China, mainland China, has made it in the last 35 years, okay? Some of them have more money in multiples than anybody in the US. And they may be families that are 5 generations old who have been able to amass this grand wealth. And you're talking about people who grew up in communism and now have more money than they can even imagine. Yeah, and so the first thing is this: when you come from a situation where you have to survive. See, a lot of people don't understand what's going on in China. Is that it's still technically a communist government, but under communism, healthcare was paid for, education was paid for. Now, no healthcare is paid for. You have to buy private insurance. You get nothing. Okay, so if I'm an entrepreneur in China and I make money and I have enough to finally live a lifestyle and have things that I could never even dare to dream of, and I've provided for my family, why in the world am I going to give it away, right? And just for take the example of hospitals. When I want treatment, I go and I whack cash down on the counter and I say, treat my kid now. and everybody just gets kicked out, and my kid will be treated first. So this is the mentality coming here, is that why would I give that hard-earned money to you? And the reason why they come here is because of insecurity back home. Your money is not secure. If you have a Chinese passport and you have a lot of wealth in a Chinese bank, you are by far secure. Like, you are so far from secure. So the whole point is to get here, get a Canadian passport, diversify your assets, and so it's that if the charity, if they understand this process and what the immigrant goes through from whatever country they come from, then you can better understand how to approach them and what they would be interested in. You know, the first thing from healthcare standpoint, we talk about this all the time, is you got to get them to know that yes, it is a free healthcare, socialized healthcare system here. Your donation is not directly linked to preferential service to all your family members, right? But usually in China, any kind of donation is usually tied to a deal, right? I will give you the money, but make sure that this movie star shows up at my house. Like, this happens, all this kind of stuff happens all the time. So that's a huge, like, an education process that I don't think we've ever seen before,
right.
like with any immigrant population.
Yeah. Although I do think that, and I can give you an actual example, that there is an appreciation of gratitude and giving out of gratitude for having supported perhaps a family member. Mm-hmm. I can use an example of a family whose child was treated at Sick Kids. The family, who is from Hong Kong, spends perhaps a quarter of their year here in Toronto, so they know the community. Child was treated at Sick Kids. We knew who the family was, and guess what? I went over to Hong Kong to meet with the family just to say, what was your experience like? The first words practically out of this person's mouth was, how can I help you? Oh, that was music to my ears. And honestly, within half an hour, I had $1 million check ready to go because of the need to express gratitude for what it is that we did.
Now, this was in Hong Kong?
Yeah.
But
the person, the child got treatment here in Toronto. The family spends a quarter of their time in Toronto. Yeah. And what they are buying, yes, in part gratitude, but now they have access to somebody who they can call. And that's important too, like the relationship of being able to, oh, I know you now, and if I ever need you in the future, even though we will not give preferential treatment, the point is there's an impression that somehow they're going to get that kind of preferential treatment.
I think very few Chinese from the mainland understand that concept. Yeah. Because there's no chance, there's no reason to show your gratitude because you've already paid up front.
Right.
You know, I can't even explain like how bizarre some of the things I've heard. I've heard the most bizarre things. A client called me and said that they have a friend who is expecting a baby, and I mean, this is just the most bizarre. I can't even make this up. Wants the baby to be a Canadian citizen. The feng shui master in China told her exactly what time and date this baby must be born. So, Justin, can you please arrange it? I said, well, I guess that baby's not coming out naturally. So I said, I have a cousin in obstetrics, and I called her and I said, is this even doable? Like, is that? And she goes, no, unless it's medically indicated, we're not going to do a C-section. Anyway, so I called her back. I called my client back and I said, listen, this is not happening, not in Canada. But guess what? It happened, and I didn't ask any questions, and it did happen. And she was put up in the Four Seasons for a couple of weeks afterwards, and then flown back to Beijing.
Right.
So those are the kind of things, and that mindset. I go to China all the time. I have two brothers that live there, and my family's originally from Hong Kong, and I have still quite a lot of relatives in southern China. I don't even get that concept. Like, I don't get it. It was interestingly bizarre. but I don't get it. So from that standpoint, the education process is long. Now, there are a lot of mainland Chinese who are here in Canada who came actually in the late 80s on the old point system. And it's interesting to talk to them because they totally get it. They totally understand. I mean, they've not lost their values, their culture, but their thinking has been sort of westernized in terms of how charity works, how the socialized medical system works. So I find it very interesting to talk to people from China who came here years ago.
Yeah.
You know, on the old point system.
So a lot of the mainland immigrants, in my experience, are also using intermediaries here in Canada to help them settle or to help get their business launched. So whether or not it's somebody within the Chinese community that's helping to broker their introduction to Canada, or I found out the other day that a board member of the hospital who works for McKinsey, it turns out that he has helped bring the mainland Chinese business into this country, and the guy just bought a $15 million home in the bridle path. I said, introduce me quick. But what do you suggest for us as we think about finding those kinds of intermediaries that can facilitate introductions?
Well, there are a number of intermediaries. I mean, if you talk to very successful immigration lawyers, yeah, and immigration consultants. So, okay, here's one example, and it's very practical. There are immigration consultants who specialize in the PNP program. So that's the provincial nomination program, okay? So what they do is, I, as the immigration consultant or immigration lawyer, advertise B2B and say, I'm looking for companies who are looking for between $1 and $5 million interest-free loan, okay? And I'll probably get a ton of people. And some companies will be, maybe out of 100 companies, 20 will be decent. I'll probably choose 10. Then what I would do is I will file them for the PNP program. Okay, I'm doing all of this at my own expense. Well, I'll charge the companies, but it's, that's not where the money is, okay? So, and now I've got 10 companies that have all been approved for PNP, okay? Those lawyers and immigration consultants are a gold mine for charities. There's a couple of reasons. First of all, they will find the the immigrants who have the money, because once they match them up with the business, the deal is literally within a few days, $1 million will be transferred into that bank account for the benefit of the company. And within about 6 months to 12 months, the entire family will get their Canadian passports. And it's a whole other set of rules we have. I mean, they won't know the capital city of any province, and they won't be able to string an English sentence together, but they'll still pass. And so those immigration consultants, for example, are a wealth of contacts. Now, it doesn't mean, having money doesn't mean you're going to give it.
No.
So there's a couple of things around that. The first thing, if people in China, if they're very successful business people, they have a reputation. People know them. Now I come to Canada and nobody knows me. Now, people sure will know me if I make a big hoopla and make a huge donation to sick kids. And you're going to unveil this atrium in my honor, yes, and I'm going to invite all my friends, I'm going to get all the media, I'm going to make sure the overseas media get the press release, and it's published. Now I'm a big deal in Canada. Overnight, they buy their reputation. So a reputation that would normally take you or I in a business to build up over 10 years, they basically shop for their reputation. So that is, that's one example of how a charity could seek those.
That said, and this is a great example, do your homework to also find out what kind of business that individual has been involved in China.
Yes.
Because we know of one individual in particular who has done exactly what you have said, but has also been involved in the tainted milk scandal in China about selling tainted baby's milk. And guess what? That reputational issue is coming to bear on the institution that accepted money from this particular donor. And so while we see dollar signs in front of our eyes wide open, because you've got to do your due diligence to make sure that you really do have an understanding about where the funds come from, right?
Yeah, and I think if you just I mean it's not big in the news for some reason, but the Chinese central government actually, okay, if you meet somebody here who is, well, there are a lot of them at the colleges and universities. They're in their 20s, and they say, "Oh, my dad or my mom is a vice mayor of a certain city or whatever." Now, I know what a mayor makes in China. Okay, for them to send their kids to Seneca is they have like a second job somewhere, and a lot of money is made in ways that would not be considered legal in this country. Actually, the central government pays a commission to the Canadian government to return those people if they can find out their source of income is fraudulent.
Bounty hunters.
Well, it's sort of an unspoken thing. A lot of people don't know about this, but thousands have been sent back. Now, when they get sent back, I feel sorry for them because it's kind of not a pretty ending for them. But they are being sent back because the first thing they want to do is come to Canada and hide the money and then just sort of say, "Woo, it never happened," right? But those people have money, and those are people that probably will be really highly motivated to start doing good, or at least look like they're doing good, and hide behind all these good deeds and all kinds of stuff. So you, like Ted said, you really do have to do your due diligence, and if you're ever going to take on any market that is, outside of that what we, for lack of a better term, mainstream market, not only understand it, but either go to that country, have a visit, or at least pay somebody who has visited and have them work for you. Because without actually going and meeting people, you really won't understand it at all. Yeah.
Justin, one of the things you've shared with me, because as we think about where do people get their information about our institutions, or just information in general, and we think of Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, and yet the Chinese community accesses information not on the channels that we typically would access. So can you talk a little bit about how information is being consumed in the community?
Yeah. Like the first thing, charities do is they put up a website, and you get a Facebook page these days, and a Twitter page, and probably YouTube. And if you're more adventurous, you'll get Instagram and be on Pinterest and stuff like that. Just depends on how much you can manage. But there's a great program called Hootsuite that if you guys are social media managers, you just log in there, and then it just duplicates everything. Most charities feel like, okay, I'm on the web, so the entire world can see us and they can get all the information they want. Well, actually, like if you're hosted by an American ISP, your site is completely blocked in China. Okay, your actual website is blocked, and nobody in China is seeing your Facebook page or your Twitter page or your YouTube channel. All of that is blocked. Google ads and Google searches are completely modified and moderated in China. So in a way, some people could see that as a bad thing. As a marketer, I love it because it's like a whole new stream of revenue. But but essentially, in China, China has created their own equivalents, which are very successful. Like I'll give you an example. So Weibo is the Chinese version of Twitter. Okay, and there's two companies that actually make this particular type of chat. One is called Sina, and one is Tencent. If you put those two companies together, they're larger than Twitter. And both of them are listed on the NASDAQ. Renren is the Facebook of China. There's a channel that a lot of Chinese, from mainland China, a lot of TV stations are launching their web channels on a site called QQ. It has a chat program that's very similar to the old ICQ, if anybody remembers that. So there's like a chat window, but also they live stream channels like TV programming and stuff. And I guess what I'm saying is, if you really want to reach that particular market, you have to be on those social media programs. I mean, there is a program that's really taken off like wildfire here, in China, but also in Latin America for some reason. It's called WeChat, and it is it's a two-way voice walkie-talkie chat, microblogging. It's sort of a hybrid of maybe Instagram / Twitter / mini Facebook. Anyway, that thing is huge. I mean,
And I think the point, though, is that even though these are Chinese, if you will, built social networking systems, the reality is that many in the Chinese community here are using them as their principal means of engagement. And so when we think about reaching out and talking to the community about our organizations and giving back and our relevancy and everything, we need to be in those channels, not in the traditional channels that we think about.
And they're not going to switch because all the friends are on those
Exactly.
channels. So, and in many ways, their functionality is for a lot of these are a lot better than their American counterparts.
Yeah. I thought we would shift gears a little bit and also just share a case example for you in terms of what we've been doing at SickKids in terms of our Chinese outreach initiative, and then bring in some questions. So one of the first things we did is we tried, as we started to think about how were we going to tackle sort of diverse communities, is that we hired Environics to do a screen of our database to determine, and they have this fantastic program where they're able to actually determine what community you come from on the basis of your last name. And they are statistically very, very correct. So we actually took about 1 million records in our database, and Environics screened them for the purposes of looking at what proportion were from different diverse communities, how representative were our donors relative to the overall population in those communities, and then also overlaid it with the wealth capacity in the communities to try to determine which communities we should actually focus in on. So for example, believe it or not, in the Italian community, we are really doing well. We're overrepresented in terms of donors, and there's still good capacity. But we're already doing a lot of work in that community, so guess what? We don't need to spend a lot of time and attention. In the South Asian community, we found out actually that we are somewhat overrepresented in donors, but guess what? Capacity was not going to be nearly as attractive to us, and so set that as a sort of a B-tier priority. Chinese community, again, looking at, and here they were able to differentiate between different segments of the Chinese community. Guess what? We were underrepresented in our donors, which came as a huge surprise to us because we actually thought we were doing pretty well. But there's great capacity. And so what it allowed us to do was to actually say, okay, there are going to be, we're going to make focused efforts in certain communities. And I think this goes back to an earlier point that you made, which is let's not cover the waterfront in terms of trying to reach out to every single diverse community that you can. Determine where you can have a focus and have an impact. So that's sort of step one. We chose the Chinese community very deliberately. Yep. Second, you have to find some champions who are prepared to actually work with you to understand the community, understand their needs, their wants, the gaps, and fortunately, guess who I have on my board? Justin Poi, who agreed to co-chair a Chinese community initiative with another member of our board, Frank Look. Both people who are deeply ingrained in the community and who could network us to other people. Then it was a matter, too, of determining how do we start building relevancy and education in the community. And here we did a partnership with Tsingtao and Fairchild Media to be able to start building out information into the communities about what SickKids does, what impact people have, and actually profiling people like Justin and Frank as a means of showing that we do have members of the community who are engaged in us, and also focusing in on patient profiles, doctor profiles who come from China, for example, and are part of SickKids, so that, again, we could show that the community actually had relevancy within the organization. Then we put a fundraising strategy together. And we said, you know what, this is a long-term fundraising strategy play. It is not going to be something that happens overnight, but we're prepared to put the resources behind it. And we specifically hired a brilliant woman, Connie Low, who completely understands the Chinese community, speaks Mandarin and Cantonese and English, who's got very good ties into the community, and who is, what I love about her is she just doesn't say no, right? Like, she just does it. And with that, then, we've built out a whole strategy, an events program, a direct marketing initiative, a radiothon and a telethon on Fairchild, now a major gifts program that's starting to bear some fruit. So what's your experience been with the whole sort of Sick Kids example? What are the things that have made it successful? And what advice would you give to people as they think about potentially building out their own strategies?
Well, I've been on many boards and many committees where I've taken part or led this kind of strategy.
Yeah.
And I have to say that Sick Kids has been sort of the dream environment because everything that I've always wanted to do, you have actually, and your team has made it happen. And that comes down to commitment. So, first of all, Ted alluded to Connie Low. Having somebody like her is absolutely vital to the success of this kind of project. I've been involved with charities before where we have all the various pieces. Where it falls apart is they've given me half a development officer who doesn't even understand the community. So it just falls apart right there. That's the bottleneck, and it collapses. And so with Sick Kids, I mean, it's a very unique environment in that the patient base and the families involved it's easy to tie relevance. There's more than 10 handfuls of super geniuses of Chinese descent that have come out of there with incredible research. So plenty of bragging rights there. And the board, even though a lot of the board members aren't directly involved in it, they're very committed to this strategy. And therefore, the staff is very committed to the strategy. Now, if I was to take this to a smaller level in a smaller charity, how would that look? All the elements would stay the same. Building the story, pitching it to the media, and I'm going to give a very good example of an organization that done this pretty much on a shoestring budget, and then finding a person who is very committed from the Chinese community to be part of the team, to champion. And it can be done on a smaller scale. Like, the Sick Kids example is much bigger because the fundraising, this signature event that we've created is mostly a marketing and PR type of event, but it's really to cultivate, and identify larger donors. That kind of thing, as everybody knows, requires some upfront investment on the part of charity, and not every charity can do that. So that fully understood, but there's plenty of other ways to do it. When it comes to the person that you hire, I have to say, so with Connie, I've known Connie ever since she got off the plane in 1996 from Hong Kong. A woman used to work for me in my agency and met her in Hong Kong and said, "Oh, when you get to Toronto, you got to call Justin," because Connie has amazing Chinese copywriting skills, and she can write in both a Cantonese and a Mandarin style, which is very unique. And the fact that she can speak Cantonese and Mandarin perfectly, and her English is very good too, that's also very unique. So in fact, what happened was, I used to be very heavily involved. In fact, I was co-chairing the United Way's Blossom Ball, which was a Chinese community event, and I actually got Connie her job at United Way, and then after that, prior to that, I worked with her when she was at the Heart and Stroke Foundation. So she knows that now. How many of them are out there? Actually, there's quite a few. I was just talking to a woman out in the hallway who used to be with Seneca, and She is very ingrained in the Chinese community, and there are quite a few if you look, and you can, I'm more than happy to recommend. But a good example of a charity that's done it on a very shoestring budget, and I don't have any insider information or anything. I'm a donor, but is Orbis, the Flying Eye Hospital.
Yep.
So they have for an organization that has much visibility as theirs. I'm blown away at how small their budget is. Yet the plane is donated by FedEx. They pay a salary for one person that they did get from China to come here and manage Canada. One person, all of Canada, no support staff. Okay. Orbis is very well known in the Chinese community because they provide so much service in Asia, but also in certain parts of India and Pakistan. And so they do have a little bit of a head start there. But boy, they run events on a shoestring budget. Like they get FedEx to book one of the hangars over at one of the private terminals at Pearson. Yeah, they have the plane there. You can walk on the plane and cocktails and all sorts of stuff. And everything's donated. They're an example of an organization that's done it really well on a completely shoestring budget. And they did a very good job of pitching to Fairchild to do a telethon for them. We also at Sick Kids do a telethon. They only have so many telethons they can do, so your pitch had better be good, and you better be relevant, and you better know what you're talking about when you go and pitch them. Otherwise,
and also be prepared to spend money with them, because
exactly,
there's
yes.
a quid pro quo here,
yes.
believe it or not.
Yes.
You talked about the importance of having champions on the board who get behind it and having the board be supportive. And this is not something that I'm looking for any form of platitudes, but I do think that, and I share this with all of you, that I do think that having also the chief staff person of your organization be out there and visible in the community and show their commitment to the enterprise is equally as important. And so I think it's fair to say that, I've really tried to be very visible in this initiative.
Yep.
At committee meetings, meeting with prospective supporters and that kind of thing, and that shows the seriousness with which the organization is prepared to really do this work. And while it's wonderful to have Connie, the reality is that Connie shouldn't be the only face of the organization to the community. And it's again where I encourage you that if you are moving in this kind of direction, and it doesn't matter what community, by the way, that your chief leadership needs to be out front and visible and engaged in it, because it shows respect. And that respect is so important to earning trust. And the trust is all important in being able to sustain the relationship.
No, I completely agree. Like, people actually are surprised when we have a meeting in a Chinese restaurant and they see that Ted's shown up. I mean, a lot of people get it. They realize how big Sick Kids Foundation is. Now, I've been involved in charitable organizations where, I'll put together a third-party event or whatever, and the executive director or CEO will show up for the first meeting, and then show up at the end to receive the check. And I want to bring this up before I forget, and this is that is one way to really turn off your committee. When you invite people from a community and the pitch sounds great, like we're committed and we want to do this, we want to work with you. People who sign up for that, many of them are really passionate. And for them to feel like they only get called when you need a check, and that you don't value their input and that you don't value their ideas is actually, I would say you're better off doing nothing at all.
Right.
Because the damage that you could possibly inflict on yourselves is not insignificant.
Yeah. And people want to see that you're in it for the long haul. That's the other thing. That, again, it isn't tokenistic in any way, that you really are committed over a long period of time. And that you actually have a strategic plan around it that looks out into the horizon and sets milestones over a longer period than simply, we're here today and gone tomorrow. So I think that continuity, and you spoke to it in terms of commitment, is so really very important.
Well, and that comes down to budgeting. Like, how long a term do you think of this? the whole idea that there is diversity, if an organization comes up with a diversity strategy that is not integral to the overall strategy of the organization, that, if anybody finds out, that to me, or if I find out when I've been asked to join an organization and a committee or whatever, that to me seems like there's not much commitment.
Right.
You know, it reminds me very much of large financial institutions in the States that start up a service and then, oh, it didn't work, never happened, right? And a lot of charities do that. I think I can understand why they do it. It's sort of part of the risk management process. But if people don't feel like there's a commitment and it's not part of your overall strategy, then, and you know what, it has to be. Look at our makeup in Canada right now. I mean, you know, all kidding aside, Canada is a very small population. We have such high immigration here. There are very few places that, especially in large cities, that are homogeneous in terms of, you know, what people look like, and there is more and more multiculturalism. If it is not, if reaching out to diverse communities, especially the larger ones, is not part of your overall strategy, I think you're really, really going to be behind the eight ball. Yeah.
Justin, one of the things you said earlier, and then I'm going to open it up to questions from you folks, so start thinking, is that we walk this fine line of trying to build, you know, relevancy and strategies specifically to, say, diverse communities, but on the other hand, we also hear from the communities that they don't want to be so marginalized that they feel that they are being targeted and want to be sort of accepted within the totality of the work that we do. And where is that fine line between driving, if you will, a very specific inclusivity strategy, but also making a community feel that they're part of the broader whole as well?
That's a really, really good question. I will start, before I talk about the larger, I could just talk about even just me as to why I get asked to join a board. You know, now in some cases it's because of the industry I'm in advertising, but if I get asked by a general charity or whatever, other than, you know, like with the kids, I was a patient when I was a kid, so obviously there's a tie in there. But if it's an organization that I have absolutely no relevance to, I get it. I know why I'm being asked. I mean, I'm Chinese. I mean, I get it. But for me, the whole point is that, yes, that's fine. I will join. But give me the tools to make a difference. Give me the tools to actually do what you've asked me to do and what I want to do. Because then I can come out of there saying, you know, I did that for you. That's a very finite project. In fact, it's very easy for me to define my role when I sit on a board. Okay? And I'm absolutely fine that you have identified me that way. Now, with donors, do they want to be identified that way? There are some that say, listen, you know, you'll always get those that say, I've been in Canada for, 20 years, this is insulting, whatever, that's fine. They have every right to. But there are many that really appreciate, I'll give you an example, like political fundraisers. If you go to the Chinese New Year dinner, you can stand there and chat with the premier for about 15, 20 minutes for about $100, including the meal. You go to their annual dinner over at the Royal York or at MTCC, it's going to cost you $1,500 and you get a handshake, right? So there's some that really don't complain. They say, I'll donate to the Chinese New Year one. But the fine line there is something that is a constant moving target. I think it's safe to say if they're new immigrants, you're pretty much in the safe zone. If you package it in such a way that there is a direct intent, like, if you say, if you're a health charity and you say, we have identified that, your particular community is heavily afflicted with this type of disease, and this is the data to back it up, and this is why we would love you to be part of this name of your community here strategy. How can anybody get offended of that? Right. Unless they completely disassociate themselves mentally from their own community. So I think it's best to, look at your overall mission, make it relevant, and then you're not going to make anybody feel like they've been put into a token group or anything like that.
I also think it's just classic fundraising where you understand what motivates a particular supporter to engage with your organization, and it may be different for one versus the other, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
Even though you come from the same community, the motivation of either identifying with the community as a means of engaging versus actually wanting to identify with a broader community, everybody's going to have a different point of view, for sure. Why don't we open it up to the floor for any questions that you folks have, either about this or anything in general? Yes, the back of the room. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
What I have noticed, a lot of to and fro, as opposed to, for example, Eastern Europeans that came after the Second World War and could not return because of the Iron Curtain. So very tended to assimilate, adapt, mores much faster. At least that's my impression. So I'm wondering if you could share your observations about approaches to segmentation regarding first, second, and maybe even third generation.
So with the Hong Kong Chinese community, they, for the most part, have settled here. So the second generation is here, and they've become quite assimilated. In fact, by the second generation, they'll still identify as being Chinese, but they're pretty much assimilated into Canadian society. I'm talking about the Hong Kong Chinese, unless they went back for, like, a lot of times after university they'll go back because they want to see what it's like to work in Hong Kong. But for the most part, they end up back here. The reason why you see a lot of to and fro with the Chinese population now from mainland China is, now remember, in Hong Kong, if you were educated, you also spoke English.
Yeah.
So you had employment opportunities here. You were able to start a business. You could read contracts. I mean, some of the biggest papers in Hong Kong are English papers. In China, it's a completely different scenario. So the reason why you're seeing the to and fro is because once somebody gets their family settled here, well, they can't speak, for the most part, any English. So in order for them to continue to earn money, they have to go back to China. And what we're seeing, right, well, we haven't seen, from the newest immigration, we haven't seen any second generation. Well, there's babies, but they're still very small babies. But we're still in that phase where the crazy money is still being made, right? So as long as crazy money is still being made, people are going to go back and forth, because the crazy money certainly isn't here, unless somebody knows something I don't know. But the crazy money is not here. The crazy money is still in China. So a lot of students that you'll see, I mean, if you speak to anybody who works at U of T or Waterloo, some of the universities that have a high concentration of people from mainland China, they'll come here, they'll study here and whatnot, but they immediately want to go back. And there's obvious reasons.
I'm struck by the number of people, particularly in the Hong Kong community, who still keep perhaps a residence here and part of their life here, but are spending a lot of their time still in Hong Kong or in China. Yes. Which means, how do you stay engaged and connected to those people when in fact they're going back and forth and back and forth? And I would just say that in my own particular case, I'm now going to Hong Kong fairly regularly to keep connected with those people who have been significant supporters to the institution, and where we're also identifying people who have had a relationship, but we haven't done any asking. And actually, when you go over there and start to chat with them, again, it's another sign of respect that you're coming to them sort of there, and so far giving a very good reception.
Well, that's the interesting thing about Hong Kong and Canada. There is a very deep-rooted history between Hong Kong and Canada. And while, for those of you who haven't been, I mean, it even with the nonstop flights, it's still a long trip. But boy, the fluidity between the two places is
incredible.
Huge. It's almost like people just getting on a plane and going to New York. It's that fluid.
If you had to, and often we struggled with this, I know at Sick Kids we developed a sort of a very diversified fundraising strategy for our Chinese community initiative, but, and this may be a generalization again, but have you, over the years of your working in the Chinese community, whether or not it's the Hong Kong or mainland Taiwanese, is there a particular form of fundraising that's particularly attractive to the community versus another? I once was told it's the Chinese community loves guilt versus guilt, G-I-L-T versus G-U-I-L-T, and focus your strategy on that. But is it too much of a generalization, or should we be thinking about broad-based strategies for fundraising?
Well, with the Hong Kong Chinese community, the reason why events have been sort of the very popular catalyst is because it ties the community together. It becomes a social thing, but how they get the big donations out is basically a type of peer pressure, right? It's not so much competition, but it's like, come on, man. I mean, I did it. You should do it too. It's for the community, and so that's typically how it has been going for decades now with the Hong Kong Chinese community. With the mainland Chinese community, we have yet to see, other than the odd large donations, we have yet to see anything. But here's my prediction, okay? Chinese businesses as a whole, if you look at any Chinese business that has been successful, and I'm talking from mainland China, everything from Huawei to Alibaba to whatever, the typical Chinese model is make a small amount of profit off a large number of people. It's the Chinese restaurant model. Get you in, get you out. Your dinner cost you $4, but I made 50 cents.
It's the
but
volume.
You know what? I'm going to do a ton of this.
It's the volume.
And same with Alibaba. Same thing, right? We do a gazillion transactions, and we're taking a few cents off of each. Honestly, I think that if a charity comes up with a type of model where you do the same thing, and I mean, I don't like the term crowdsource funding because a lot of people don't really understand what that means, but essentially it's crowdsource funding. But if you come up with a model where you are actually reaching out to a ton, because once something becomes popular with the mainland Chinese, especially in the digital space, catches on like wildfire. It doesn't even have to make sense. It just catches on like wildfire. There's this video of a monkey that it does push-ups and sit-ups, and it was interesting. There was something tied to it, like a donation to the zoo or something, and it just went viral through these WeChat groups. And I saw it. I saw it this morning. It was sent to me.
Is somebody looking up pictures of monkey now on their phones? Is that what you're doing?
This monkey was, and it was interesting. So the video was what caught people's attention, and then when you click the link, it was asking for very small donation, like $1 or something like that. So that kind of thing could just catch on like wildfire. So I think that that's something to look out for in terms of how the mainland Chinese may go and how you may be able to raise money. Because I always like to look at business models. And so far, the Chinese companies that are making headlines are the ones that have a huge customer base, but small profit on each.
Interesting. Yes?
I want to talk, I used to study Chinese for years back in university, and I lived in London. I got to know the British kind of Chinese immigration patterns that remind me of what's going on here now, where you used to only hear Cantonese, and then essentially you start hearing more and more Mandarin, and then everyone started catering to these Mandarin speakers, right? So instead of the sort of, Chinese community having to, let's say, set up a new, old people's home, they just would start shifting to Chinese and hiring more Mandarin speakers, right? Like that was kind of what you saw. And one of the things that I'm thinking back about is the motivation factor. Because to me, I work at the Children's Age Foundation. To me, there's still, when I think back of the days that I lived in Taiwan, right, there was a certain kind of awkwardness or even embarrassment about certain issues, right? Like you wouldn't see many handicapped on the street because they would stay at home because there was a certain losing face culturally that kind of take them out, right? So there were certain issues that were sort of kept quietly inside, and you wouldn't really want to. So I can kind of see how it would be really easy to support sick kids for the obvious reasons. You're a patient, you're grateful, you walk in the door, you want to give something back, right? But I can see how other causes would run into certain issues, right? A monkey is cute. Eyes are really important, you know, like it's cute, right? So great. But, right, like if you look at mental health issues, right, or human rights issues, or, you know, children who are, you know, who are in care because their families, God forbid, couldn't do a good enough, right? There's certain stigmas, right, that would affect that. So I think a charity, I would guess that if a charity does take on this project and this commitment, I think one of the issues is also the cultural understanding here of how to relate to the cause.
Okay, so yeah, so I mean, you know, organizations, you know, everything from Special Olympics to, you know, organizations that handle drug addiction in youth and things like that, they have almost no chance, like literally. You know, well, actually, I never actually finished the story when I said I was, and I didn't kill it, but I was the last one of the last of the two co-chairs of the United Way's Blossom Ball, and then it died after that. I did not kill it, I swear. But the reason why it ended was because United Way itself stopped the whole Chinese outreach program. And a big part of that was because United Way funds certain charities in the Chinese community. And the ones that got the lion's share of the funding were organizations like Care First, like it's kind of like extended medical service and stuff. But the other organizations that United Way funds, you know, kids on the street, you know, homeless kids, drug addiction and alcohol abuse. If for the traditional Chinese family, if your kid has substance abuse problems, you're not calling United Way, and you know you're going to deal with it in the family, and you know in some cultures they will deal with it through their places of worship, yeah. So the harsh reality is there are, if you want to go after a particular community, it doesn't have to be the Chinese community, any community, you have to look at that community and say, is this even possible? Right. You know. Yeah.
Or can you create empathy? Like I think in the Chinese community, there has to be a more direct link to me from my own knowledge of the community. I think there has to be that motivation that you're speaking about. Like I'm Israeli by origin, so in the like I see like I can help create empathy with Jewish donors to causes that have nothing to do, that they've never touched, you know? And I guess what I'm asking is there no chance in hell for organizations to deal with those type of causes, with human rights, with
But actually, I would say, you know, again, I wouldn't generalize here, but you know what? If you find some champions from the community who were prepared to champion the cause and to work it through their networks, you may have a fighting chance, right? I do think it's all about finding, you know, people like the Justins and the Frank Looks of the world who are prepared to take a cause, and maybe sick kids is easier than others, but nonetheless, they're prepared to stand up and say, we believe it's important, and we hope the community does. And that doesn't say necessarily that it makes it easier for Children's Aid because people don't want to be stigmatized about, you know, child abuse, for example. But on the other hand, if you have people who are advocates in the Chinese community who are prepared to stand up and, you know, I would say at least give it a try, as opposed to just thinking that the stigma is going to be bigger than the opportunity. Yeah.
Well, oh, sorry. I'm just quickly going to add to this. The Canadian Museum of Human Rights did a Chinese campaign.
Yeah.
And I was the chair for Toronto. We had, so a lot, for me, that was a tough decision too. A big part of my business revenue comes from dealing through the Chinese government. So I had to make that decision, but you know what, it's the right thing. Yeah. We have a great story to tell. And the people that came on board all knew what the deal was, but we did get people who said, you know what, my relationship with the Chinese government is too strong, and I rely on it too much for my livelihood that I can't involve.
Right. Michelle?
All the fundraisers that I went to in China were associated with, there was a charity, but it was a government something. And so my question is how, especially with the mainland Chinese coming here, how do you foresee us being able to manage that sort of natural connection in China with charities being associated with government relations when you're coming here and there's obviously a more clear divide with that? How do you see that?
It gets even broader than that. How do you have to convince them that your charity is not a complete scam?
Yeah.
Because there's a ton. Red Cross had the biggest PR nightmare, and it's all online. You can read about it. But it basically came down to this one girl who's in prison now. Her name's Guo Mei, and she was a mistress of one of the board members. And basically in China, how it works is here, Red Cross, if they need tents, they'll tender it. There, if I'm on the board, I'll set up a company, and I make tents, and I'm the only guy you're going to buy tents from. So you can see how that works. Anyway, so cut a long story short, you have to convince them that your charity is sound, that it's solid, and show them where the money goes.
Yeah. Did you have a question too? Yeah.
I just have a question. I think we're at this interesting part of the conversation where we're talking about building affinity for our organization and our causes and having relationships and whether they're direct with people here, being able to speak the language and connect to a community in a particular way. But I guess my question would be, for people who are newly arrived from China in your experience that are in the high net wealth category, how important is it for them to be building recognition within a new community of their own community here versus the larger community of integrating into the business community across the city?
It's a great question.
Depends on what they do, and depends on how they came in. It's funny because the city of Vaughan is trying to, their neighbors to the east, Richmond Hill and Markham, are blowing them away when it comes to the Chinese community. And they, went through all the government sources to find out what is the direct foreign investment in places like Richmond Hill and Markham. And it's incredibly low on paper. And they asked me why, because they wanted me to come in and help them figure this out. And I said, well, because the DFI is measured by a very legitimate means of I'm here and I'm transferring funds here into this company. It doesn't work like that. And those cities, Richmond Hill and Markham especially, basically looked around, took a leap of faith. Council did too, and they said, you know what, we're going to put money in this. I'm taking everybody, and as mayor, I'm going to China 6 times a year, and it worked, right? So that's basically what it comes down to is understanding, that.
But I would say that there is an opportunity, I believe, to network some of these arrivals to people that we're associated with that they may want to make a contact, but it's because it's of interest to them or benefit to them. And I think that's the real thing, right? Just don't do it because, meet so-and-so. Do it because they're going to get some value out of meeting so-and-so. And that's, the reciprocal exchange. David?
Just a question on your longer-term strategy. Have you in any way entertained legacy giving plan the other way as a donor motivation? To start this strategy? You mentioned it can be effective not only in this community but also in the time.
Yes. So I would say yes, we're starting to introduce it slowly by working with some professional advisors in the Chinese community who advise clients. It's a lot more subtle than overt, again, because the community doesn't like to talk about this publicly. But it's, again, where the intermediaries play a very helpful role in connecting us to people who are prepared to have the conversation, but just not being so overt around it.
And that would be more in the Hong Kong Chinese community.
Totally.
Yeah, in the mainland Chinese community, nobody's had money long enough
to
even figure this out.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, the whole idea of life insurance,
Yeah.
they don't even get it. Why would I insure that? I mean, it doesn't even make any sense. You know, in China, things are very basic. It's like if I see a house that's worth 300,000, oh, I don't have 300,000, I can't buy the house. Like the whole idea of leveraging and mortgages and life insurance and planned giving and wills. This is all very new. It's all very, very new. Yeah.
And to the Italian community, yes, absolutely. I mean, it's quite a very robust community when it comes time to philanthropy, and we're seeing a lot of certainly interest in legacy giving, because you're now into third, fourth generations as well, where the transfer of wealth is starting to happen from one generation to the next. And if you are well positioned as a charity that's had a long time relationship with the community,
You find that motivation's there with that?
absolutely. Now, where there's a particular point of engagement with your institution, absolutely. So fortunately, we have lots of patient families who hail from the Italian community that have been long-time financial supporters, who are prepared to now talk about the continuance of their commitment after their lifetime. So it does work. Got a question at the back? Yeah.
I wanted to pick up on a point you mentioned earlier about motivation, and one of that is establishing a reputation, a little quicker here than you live back home. But I remember reading an article when Li Ka-shing gave his big donation to St. Michael's.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, one of the things that he encountered was pushback back home, where it wasn't regarded all as well as we regarded it here. And I wonder, is that still a factor? Does that influence their decision about, getting my name out there and so forth? Or is that sort of just an anomaly, or is that...
Listen, the Li Ka-shing donation, I hope nobody here is from St. Michael's, because I'm not going to, it's not that I'm trashing St. Michael's, I'm not. It was a business deal. Let's make absolutely certain how that gift came about. It came about because Li Ka-shing had cashed out of all his shares in CIBC. John Hunkin, who was on the board of St. Michael's, went to Li Ka-shing to say, now that you're leaving, a significant part of Canadian business behind, it's important for you to do something to signal your continued support for Canada. That's how that gift got done. He may have received some criticism back home, although I don't think that has kept the Li Ka-shing Foundation at all from continuing to invest in Canada, because they've continued to make some, additional gifts across the country. I've had a lot of dealings with the Li Ka-shing Foundation over the years. They are very, very discerning donors. And so it has to be a project that really actually aligns with Mr. Lee's interests. But in the case of St. Mike's, it was more of a business deal in my mind. Okay, there was a question here, yeah.
I don't know if we have a smaller population, but Chinese companies are buying up all of our lobster plants and everything like that.
Right.
I'm just curious if there's any opportunity for corporate gifts, because the people aren't really coming with it, they're just owning.
Yeah. So all across the country, natural resources, assets, mines, and things that are all being bought up, and the problem is you aren't seeing the source. They never, they may come for a visit, but you'll never know about it. So in that respect, it is very tough, unless, for example, if you were an environmental organization or something like that, if you were able to do some research, find out who are the buyers, like the parent company, and maybe build a very good case that it would be great PR if they also took care of the community because they've come into the community, something like that.
But this is where the intermediaries play an important role, because they're the ones that will introduce you. You think individual philanthropy is not well entrenched in China. Corporate philanthropy is definitely not well entrenched in China. And this is where you really have to get to the individuals through intermediaries and help them make your case that, while you're buying up all these companies, doing something for the community can really help buy some goodwill. And you know what? That goodwill is worth something to these people who are buying up businesses, for sure. Yeah. Any other questions?
Right.
Yes, over here.
Speak to the role of the family in the philanthropic decision process.
Very good question.
So with families from Hong Kong, yes, there's most families with any kind of wealth, if there's a foundation that's set up by the greater family, there will be a board that is completely comprised of family members. In smaller units, in smaller family units, if there's a foundation that's set up, then usually the person whose family that wealth is tied to will usually make a decision but consult family members. But very much, family is very important, but you always have to find out who
the real decision maker
who
is,
the
right?
actual decision maker is. Or if you know somebody within that family who's part of that sort of that immediate family, they can definitely influence and make an introduction to you. But you do need to know and speak to the person who directly makes those decisions.
Yeah. And often if the wealth hasn't been passed from one generation to the next, but your relationship is with the younger generation, it's often still the parent or the parents that are going to make the decision. And you have to build as much trust with the parent as you do with the child. And they can play a role in helping you do that. But I think back to one particular donor that I had from the Chinese community, and I had spent a lot of time cultivating the son. He finally felt comfortable enough to introducing me to his father. I spent 5 years in being able to get a commitment. I finally got a $5 million commitment. And I turned to the father and I said, why now? Why after 5 years are you prepared to make this commitment? He says, because I finally trust you. Okay, I thought I was trustworthy all along. But anyway, no, but I think that's really important. I mean, again, the cycle, particularly around major gift giving in the community, the cycle is even further elongated than we would see for typical major gift donors, because they are learning about your organization. They are trying to build trust. The strength of the relationship is all important. And you can't give up too easily, right? That's the other thing is you may think that, oh gosh, 2 years, 3 years, should I even keep going? If you really do believe that there is legitimate interest, then it is worth continuing, because my experience has been you'll finally land something at some point. You will. We're getting near the end of our session, so I'd like to actually thank my colleague, Justin Poy, for doing such a fantastic job here this morning. I hope you will join me in thanking Justin for all of his wisdom. And
I'm going to thank you
Great.
For giving Justin the opportunity
Yeah.
to do such a terrific job, but also for adding your own thoughts and insights over a career of experience in the fundraising game.
Sure.
I think the number of questions that you both got demonstrate the great interest of the group in the topic under discussion. I love the fact that it extended slightly beyond the Chinese community. And listening to it, what struck me is the depth of knowledge that's required to begin to communicate with the wide range of people who now call this country home. And the time and energy and thoughtfulness that's required, it pays dividends. I think the most encouraging thing is that it clearly pays dividends. But there's a lot of investment, and although there's learning that's generalizable, I think the comments made, I was particularly struck by what kinds of causes resonate and what do you do about those that don't.
Right.
I think one of the learnings that I've had since I've gotten involved with this Diversity in Philanthropy project is the fact that you cannot generalize from one community to another. So thank you both very much.